Looking for a place to speak your truth? This podcast is on an endless pursuit to build through entrepreneurship, empowerment, and creativity. Through thought-provoking content and a fearlessness to dive into untouched topics with an undeniable dedication to highlighting others who are often overlooked. This is Deep Conversations.
Stay tuned for Deep Conversation Podcast.
Welcome to Deep Conversations Podcast, everybody. I'm your host, Ryan Stewart, and today I am blessed here to have a friend. I can say that off camera we've been talking, and Miss Traci Scott, she's an author, she's a former broadcast journalist, and you are a strategic communications professional.
Yes, that's correct. That's correct.
Yeah. So before we get started, I want you, Miss Traci, to give the viewers a little bit of the background of yourself and just a little bit of your upbringing.
Wow. So just as we were kind of talking right now, I'm a military brat, first and foremost. And for people who don't understand that, if they hear the word brat, that's kind of like, it's a badge of honor to call yourself a military brat. And my dad, Jesse Scott, was a Tuskegee Airman. And my stepfather, my mom divorced and remarried my stepfather. So we married back into the Air Force. I was born at Lagos Air Force Base in Portugal. I've not been back, but I grew up on military bases around the country. And that all of this leads to how and where I am today. I lived a long time in the Midwest, but then we were transferred to Yokota Air Force Base in Japan. So I went to high school in Japan, graduated high school in Japan. And that's actually where my broadcasting career started, Ryan. When I was in high school at this Air Force base, each military service had a 5-minute newscast. So on Monday, it was the Navy. On Tuesday, it was the Marines. On Thursday, it was the Air Force. And they always invited some young person from the high school to talk about what was happening at the high school. So somebody would come on and say, oh, we have homecoming this week. And so a friend of mine named Traci did that news portion. And I was like, well, how did you do that? I want to do that. I was just curious. And so she said, well, as a matter of fact, I'm going to not do it for a while. So do you want to try it? And I was like, sure. And so I went, and you write a script. They show you how to do a script. And so I recorded my little 1-second portion of a 5-minute newscast. And I thought, well, that was cool. And so I started watching the Air Force sergeant as he was in the booth. Now, this is way back in the old days. There was nothing digital at all. As a matter of fact, when you recorded an interview, like if we were talking and if one of us messed up, you'd have to stop the tape. You'd have to take a razor blade, cut it in pieces, and then splice it together. And like with a piece of tape, put it together so it was seamless. So that's the old technology. So I watched him do it. Well, one day he went on maneuvers, and this is really important. He went on maneuvers to Korea to do maneuvers with other military people. And he said, Traci, I'm going to be gone for a couple of weeks on maneuvers. Why don't you do the 5-minute newscast yourself? Now, I was 17 years old at this time. And I was like, okay, you want me to do it? And so they really helped me. The Air Force Public Affairs Office would write the script, and I'd go in and I'd add my piece. Then I would go to the recording studio and record this 5-minute newscast announcing what the Air Force was doing that week. That was unheard of. I was not in the Air Force. I was a 17-year-old kid. And the thing that was important because of my Midwest upbringing, that how you pronounce things is important. And back then, it was even more important because we were in Japan. And Japanese people would listen to the American radio station to learn how to speak English and make sure that they learned it the correct way and the grammar was good and all of that. So Ryan, it's laughable. I would spend hours in the recording booth trying to put together this 5-minute newscast because I'd make a mistake. I'd have to stop the tape, take the razor blade, cut it in half, splice it back together and put it together. But finally I got the hang of it. And when this Air Force sergeant came back, he's like, you know what, Traci, you're doing such a good job. Keep the radio show. So at 17 years old, I was announcing the news for the Air Force in Tokyo, Japan. So that started my whole career. And but when I went to Howard for undergrad. So I graduated from Japan, a high school in Japan, and at the time my stepdad had orders to move back to the US, and it so happened he was going to be at Andrews Air Force Base out here in Maryland, and I got accepted to Howard University, so everything worked out really well. But when I went to Howard, I wanted to be a doctor. And I was sitting in botany class. I was like, I ain't doing this. This is birds. So as I mentioned to you, I went to go see my grandmother who lived in Philly. She was a maid for a wealthy family in Philadelphia. And we were watching Barbara Walters do an interview on TV. And I looked over at her and we called her Lala. I said, Lala, do you think I could be as good as Barbara Walters? She said, I think you can be better. That's all I needed. I went back to Howard. I changed my degree, and then I got in the broadcast journalism field. So, and I'm going to try to put all these stories together quickly. But when I went to Howard, I was there when a lot of really interesting people were there. First of all, Kamala Harris was pledging AKA when I was pledging Delta.
Oh, yeah.
And I didn't know her, but I know some of her sorority sisters. And there are people who are on TV now. If you watch CNN, there's Frederica Whitfield. If you watch CBS News, I think Michelle is on there, Miller. And so there were a lot of interesting people that were coming through Howard at the time. Isabella Wilkerson, who was a Hilltop newspaper reporter and editor, had just graduated. So there were a lot of interesting people at Howard at the time. But when I got an internship at CBS News, and that is a whole nother story. And we can have a second conversation because that was crazy. But I managed to get an internship at CBS News. And I had, at one point, I was working for two different broadcasts. And this is in Washington, D.C. on M Street. So I was working for CBS This Morning, and I was working for Charlie Rose. So I'd have to get up at 2 a.m., ride my bicycle to CBS, get there by 4 a.m. to do the morning news from 4 to 9. Then from 9 a.m. until 6 p.m., I rode my bicycle. I worked for Charlie Rose, who had a TV show, as a researcher. So I was literally working from 4 a.m. till 6 p.m. Then I'd have to ride my bicycle back to the dorms and try to go to sleep. And you cannot go to sleep on any Howard dorm in the summertime, okay? And like Santita Jackson, Jesse Jackson's daughter, was my suite mate. So Santita would come down, Traci. And I'm like, Santita, I'm trying to sleep. I got to get up in a few minutes. What? And so she's like, look, I need a broom. Okay, Sandy, take the broom. So it was fun. It was vibrant. Howard was the best at that time. But when I finished my internship, the people said, Traci, you are the hardest working intern we've ever had, and we want to offer you a job. So before I even graduated from Howard, I was offered a job at the network level, and it was a basic entry level job. And that was unheard of. When you go into broadcasting, Ryan, you don't get on the radio and start talking for NBC News. There's a whole process.
You got to start at the bottom. Yep.
Got to start at the bottom. So yep. I went from college to network television, and I worked at CBS News for about 11 years, and I worked my way up. I just started off answering phones and making sure that people were, had what they needed. Mm-hmm. And then I worked my way up to covering a presidential campaign. And so they had this thing called Kids on the Bus. They used to have boys on the bus, and these were old, crockety old journalists who'd been around forever. But they decided with the new people, younger people coming, they wanted to get younger people. So I was one of the kids on the bus, and I covered the Gore half of the Clinton Gore campaign.
Wow.
Yeah, so that was pretty much from right after the convention in July of 92 all the way through election night. And so I've had these wonderful experiences that I had at CBS News, and I covered Hurricane Andrew with Dan Rather. Leslie Stahl. These are old network people, and people really should look these names up because they're older people. But Leslie Stahl is still around. She's still on 60 Minutes. And I was trying to decide if I wanted to be on TV. I was always behind the scenes. And CBS had this reporter training program because they were trying to bring more minorities onto their newscast. So I got into the program, and Leslie Stahl encouraged me. She's like, Traci, if you want to do this, I was at this age when I finally got on TV. So go ahead and do it. And Leslie was she was so sweet and so supportive. So I went to Las Vegas. I was on TV in Las Vegas, which is a fun place to be on TV.
Yeah, Las Vegas, yeah.
It was crazy, crazy fun. And then I said, I like politics. I have not had a chance to really, itch that political interest that I had. So I managed to work for this member of Congress. I worked for a US Senator who was from Nevada. And I won't get into all of that. But I went back to Washington from Las Vegas. I worked on the Hill, worked on the House side, worked on the Senate side. Now, I was working on the House side when the war in Iraq broke. And this is why I'm coming to hopefully a good chunk of this conversation, which is about my book. But I was working on the House side, and I just kept watching all the images on TV, and I thought, wow, I think I want to go help, but I don't know how to shoot a gun. I don't have, military experience other than being a military brat. My stepdad and daddy had died already, but they didn't want me to get into the military, especially daddy, because he had such a horrific time being a Tuskegee Airman. So one day the congressman that I was working for did a lot of stuff with the Department of Defense, with the Pentagon, and I kept seeing Pentagon staffers, and I got to know them. And one day, one of the Pentagon staffers called me and said, hey, we really need help in Iraq. We know you're really good at communications and you know how to work with reporters. Would you think about coming over to Iraq? And I was like, oh, wow, that's kind of intriguing.
Yeah.
But then I was like, I got to get past, there's one person that I have to get past. And that was my mom, Shirley Jones. And so, it's all in the book, but I managed to go to Iraq. I was there for 9 months the first time. I came back home with PTSD. And for people who don't understand, post-traumatic stress disorder is basically a mental condition that you get when you've endured something traumatic, you've seen something traumatic. And so all the things that I endured in that first 9 months in Iraq were pretty bad. So when I came back home in 2004, I didn't work for about 3 or 4 months. I was not in a good place. But then I had to get a job. I got a job working back at the Pentagon for the Iraq office in DC. And so that job, I kept going back to Iraq. I was going back to Iraq, and then I moved up into another position. And I was taking now members of Congress on CODELs back and forth to Iraq and then Afghanistan. So literally, Ryan, from 2003 until 2009, I probably made 14 trips back and forth to Iraq and Afghanistan. And I'm a civilian, all right? I'm not trained to be a military person. I'm a trained journalist. I can write about it, but Iraq really screwed me up. I came back pretty messed up, and then I couldn't get straight. And my mom died in 2006. And as a matter of fact, when I was in Iraq, I came home on emergency leave because she had ovarian cancer. So I came home for that, and then she died in 2006. So from 2003 to 2009, I was a completely different person. And that's why I wrote this book. And the book that I've written, it's called Take Off Your Hoop Earrings Before Putting on Your Gas Mask. A
Now,
civilian chick survival guide to a war zone, or guide to surviving a war zone.
and I wanted to, and that's, I'm glad you brought that up because I wanted to ask you about that. The title, the title is very, it's very interesting. I told my wife, I said, listen to this title of this book, and she was like, that sounds really good. so, so if you could just explain, what the title means for you a little
Okay.
bit.
Well, it's actually, if you think about it, who the heck wears hoop earrings in a war zone? It's the most ridiculous image that you could think of. I mean, yeah, war zones are horrific.
Mm-hmm.
They're probably worse than you can imagine. But the title comes for two reasons. First of all, um, before I went to Iraq, somebody said, when you go there, take the thing that you'll miss the most.
Mm.
Take something and hold on to it. And I always wear hoop earrings. And I was like, you know what? I love my hoop earrings. And I took a little teddy bear with me. And when I first left for Iraq, um, it took me literally 3 days to get to Kuwait. So first I left Dulles Airport in Virginia. I flew to London. Then I had like a 9-hour layover in London. Then I got on another plane and flew to Kuwait. So I was literally up for 3 days straight. And when at the time that I arrived in Iraq in October of 03, there was a high concern that Saddam Hussein, who was still running around the country, we didn't know where he was at the time, that he still had access to chemical weapons,
Mm.
and that the Iraqis would at any given time use chemical weapons against the US military and the coalition. And that includes people like me that were going over there. So when I got to Kuwait, there was just a little bit of training. Now the military, that's all they do is train for war zones. That's their job.
Yeah.
But for a civilian like me, I was supposed to stay in Kuwait and go through like 2 or 3 days of training before we went to Baghdad. We flew up into the war zone. Well, I got there, I was exhausted, and they said, okay, we know you just arrived, but get something to eat, and then you have training. I was like, training? I've been up for 3 days straight.
Yeah.
I can't, don't even ask me my name. When I say exhaustion, this is like an exhaustion that I hope that a lot of people don't have to experience. So they said, okay, fine. Well, you can wait until tomorrow to do your training. Well, at this point, the worst thing that I could have done was go to sleep. And I got to the hotel room and I was like, okay, they're giving me until tomorrow. So I went to sleep and I woke up and I was worse off than when I had not had any sleep. And they said, but you still have to go through the training. And you had like 2 or 3 days to do it. Well, one of the training, most important parts of the training was gas mask training, because we didn't know when these chemical weapons were going to drop. And so we're kind of put into this little room. There's probably about 10 of us that are in this room to go through gas mask training. And so like I said, I always have my hoop earrings on, and I met this young woman named Paula. And so Paul and I became best friends in like 2 minutes,
Yeah.
just kind of like you and me, just like you just
Yeah.
hit it off, you just vibe and it's good.
Yeah.
So Paula and I are sitting next to one another, and we're in gas mask training. So they give you a package, and the guy in the front is explaining, okay, now you rip the package open, you open up the gas mask and you put it on over your head. But the thing is, he's telling you, while this is going on, there's probably bullets flying, there's mortars flying, there's probably chemical weapons that can come at any moment. And you're like, okay, this is real. But I was so tired, Ryan. I was so absolutely exhausted. So I'm trying to, how do I open the package? Oh, and I got to open up the gas mask. And then I went to put it on over my head, and immediately my earrings were ripped because of the gas mask. And my friend Paula looks at me. She's like, Traci, you got to take off your hoop earrings before you put on your gas mask. And I was like, that's prophetic. That is like, wow. And even sitting there, it hit me. That's life. In life, now, first of all, we all go through our own war zones.
Mm-hmm.
And Ryan, that war zone can be, I have a very dear friend of mine right now who's dealing with cancer. She's battling it right now. And the moment she called me and told me she had cancer, I was like, okay, Nance, this is your war zone. And the war zone is set up, if you can make it through, if you can persevere, if you can endure the war zone, when you get through it, you will come out better on the other side.
Mm-hmm.
That's what this whole book is about. And so the war zone also involves a process. You have to go through the process. So my process in that moment was, first I got to take off my hope earrings, got to
Mm-hmm.
put it down, and then I can put the gas mask on, because once I put that gas mask on, it will save my life. It will save my life. But I had to go through the process first. And that's what life is. You know, when you are going through your war zone, you just can't jump in where, you know, not put your boots on, not put your flak vest on, not put your gas mask on, not pick up your weapon and go. You have to put everything on, make sure it fits right, because if you don't, it won't protect you the way that it needs to fulfill its purpose in protecting you.
Mm.
So that's where the title comes from. And then also, too, when I showed up into that war, into the war zone, I was dealing with military leaders, and this is their game time. This is no joke. If we mess up, people will die. And here I come rolling in the war zone wearing hoop earrings, and they're like, what the hell are we supposed to do with her?
Yeah.
And it's like, and there's a little more to that, but the point is, and the book is about life lessons that I learned in a war zone.
Mm-hmm.
And each chapter is one little life lesson. And I think one of my favorite chapter titles, and this is actually true, is called Always Be Prepared, because you never know when you're going to have to put makeup on the Secretary of Defense. And
You have to see and you have to, now you got to tell me that story. You got to tell me that story.
well, I want people to buy the book, but it's so ludicrous.
Mm-hmm.
But at the time, Secretary Donald Rumsfeld was Secretary of Defense, and he had quite a reputation. He was known for not suffering fools gladly at all. To say prickly was probably a good way of describing him, but to me, he was a scary man. I mean,
Yeah.
I've seen him dress people down, and it's like when Donald Rumsfeld dresses you down, it's like, oh man, I'm never gonna recover from that.
Yeah.
So at the time, was taking some journalists around Iraq. That was my job. I forgot to explain my job. My job was to take VIP journalists who showed up in Iraq, take them around, let them see all the infrastructure repairing we were doing, how we were trying to rebuild Iraq. So at that time, I was taking an NBC crew around, and we came back to Baghdad, and we'd just flown up north. We had an interview with General David Petraeus, who was up there, who's a well-known general. And when we came back to Baghdad, back to the green zone where we all stayed, word got out that Secretary Rumsfeld had made a surprise trip. And I was like, oh, okay, he's here. All right. Well, I know I have a friend that I know working with him. I wonder if he's traveling with Rumsfeld. So the TV crew that I was with, I said, all right, you guys hold on here, and I'm going to go see if Rumsfeld, you know, what's going on. So I went back, and Rumsfeld, there was a whole entourage of people, and Rumsfeld travels with a traveling press corps. And so when I walked back to look for a friend that I thought was with him, somebody said, hey, Rumsfeld is here. He's getting ready to have a press conference. And I was like, okay, well, let me get the crew that I'm with into the room, because I know they want to be a part of the press conference. And they're like, yeah, yeah. So before I went to go get them, I saw my friend who worked for Rumsfeld, and I was like, hey, how you doing? And then this is so comical. So he says, hey, Traci, have you ever met Secretary Rumsfeld? And I'm like, no. I'm like, I don't need to meet him. He's too scary. And so I was like, no, I haven't. And then I turned around, and the man was literally looking me right in the face. He was a little bit taller than me. And and I said, Tracy, this is Secretary Rumsfeld. And I was like, oh, okay, sir, nice to meet you. And then it was like a voice from heaven said, hey, Tracy, do you have any makeup for the secretary for his press conference? I was like, huh? I was like, are you look, is he wearing mahogany? Because I cannot run down to the Baghdad Sephora and pick something up for him because we don't have one. I was like, who's crazy enough to ask a black woman if she has makeup for this white man? What is that? And I was just like, this is it. And but the whole point is, I was like, wait a minute, this is a war zone. I better figure something out. I'm stunned beyond belief that somebody was crazy enough to ask me, but you know what? I got to figure this out. So I was like, you know what? Hold on, I'll be right back. So I remembered the crew that I was traveling with. I was like, okay, there's a cameraman, there's also a reporter. I said, well, let me ask him. And so I went to the reporter. I said, hey, Dr. Bob, I said, do you have any makeup? And he's like, yes, I do. And I'm like, yes, I got makeup. I have saved the day. And I'm going to go back. And I was like, I walked in. I was like, yeah, I got makeup. Here you go. And then another voice from heaven said, well, aren't you going to put it on him? I'm like, you want me to put makeup on this man? Are you crazy? And I was like, you know what? It's a war zone. Suck it up. You got to suck it up and you got to do it because you just got to do it. And so I was like, okay, let me do this. And I was thinking the whole time, if I screw it up and I get kicked out of Baghdad, what a story to tell. I got kicked out of Baghdad because I screwed up the makeup for the Secretary of Defense. So I walk over and I'm trying to be calm. And I said, sir, hello again. My name is Tracy. I'm going to put a little makeup on you before you do your press conference. Trust me, I know what I'm doing. I used to be a TV reporter. I'm just going to get rid of the shine on your face and you can go on in. He's like, well, just don't get rid of the scar I have on my head. You see, there was this girl and I was trying to impress her. And I'm like, oh my gosh, Donald Rumsfeld is telling me how he's trying to pick up a girl and how he got a scar on his forehead. And I'm like, okay, this cannot be happening. And sure enough, I look, he's got this big Harry Potter scar across his forehead.
He don't want to cover it up.
No, well, he's like, don't cover it up. But he was teasing me.
Okay, yeah, okay.
He was teasing. And so he starts to tell me the story about how he met this girl and he was trying to impress her and he jumped off a boat dock and he hit a rock in the water and split his. I was like, okay, I cannot believe this is happening. And as I'm sitting there listening to him, and I'm putting makeup on him, and I am just like, and I thought, oh my gosh, this is the most charming man I have met in my entire life. And after I put the makeup on, he went into the room where the press conference was, and he told me to come with him. And he said, hey, have y'all met Tracy? Do y'all know Tracy Scott? We need more people in Iraq like Tracy Scott. She came here and she volunteered. And I was like, oh my God, he was telling the whole press corps. And I was like, well, sir, thank you. That's the sweetest thing you could say. And he was adorable. And so I always like to put a little bow on the package on the story. So fast forward, I saw Secretary Rumsfeld like when I went back to the Pentagon and I worked there. He had a luncheon for Tuskegee Airmen. And he heard my dad was a Tuskegee Airman and they invited me to the luncheon. And there's this adorable picture of me and Donald Rumsfeld talking, and he looks like he's just giddy because he remembers that I put makeup on him. And then the last time I saw Secretary Rumsfeld was probably just less than a year before he died. And there's a picture of us together in the book. And then this is the last crazy thing. When he died, I was invited to attend his funeral. His funeral services, get this, were on the same day as my dad's birthday, at the same cemetery in the same chapel that we had my dad's memorial when he died.
Wow. See, that's a lot of emotion.
Yeah, it was I was overwhelmed.
Mm-hmm.
I was overwhelmed.
So me knowing a lot of people from the Army, and you as well. But when they come home, sometimes they don't get the proper help mentally. So um, I kind of want to talk about how important mental health is, because you said from 2003 to 2009, you said that was a rough time for you. So talk about, what some of those tolls can take on you when you were over there too.
Well, in the book, and again, I don't want to give it away. I want people to
Mm-hmm.
read this to capture the whole thing. I talk about the exact moment when I was hit with when I got hit with PTSD, when it just engulfed me. And the thing about a war zone, and this is why military people, they have such a hard time, because in the war zone, every day somebody's dying.
Mm-hmm.
And especially when you're on the front lines, like a lot of these soldiers and the military and the Marines are, yeah, you get into a firefight, you don't know who's going to get hit. And you're talking to somebody, Ryan, and there's a story in there that explains exactly what this is like. You're talking to somebody, and then 3 or 4 hours later, they're dead. That happens every day. And mentally, you can only handle so much of that day after day after day after day. And I was there, like I said, for 1 9-month period. And then I went back and forth. These military personnel, they may go in for 9 months at a time, a year at a time. They come back home, maybe for a year or two, and then go back again. And then they come back out, and then they go back in. And when they come home, yeah, initially you're excited to be back home, you're thrilled, but then when that dark place comes back in and it creeps back in to the family once the euphoria of coming home, then it's different. And I'll explain, at least in my case, what I went through.
Mm-hmm.
People know me. I love to smile. I love to laugh. And when you look at the book, this is a good example. When you look at my book, the back cover is me. I think it's the first time I was in a helicopter, and I'm all giddy. I got my little hat on. I look like Private Benjamin. It's all off to the side. And I'm like, I'm in a helicopter. Oh. But then the front side of the book is me when the PTSD had already set in, but I didn't realize it. No helmet, nothing. I got my vest on under my jacket, and the look on my face is like, I don't care. I don't give a damn what happens next. That is the transition physically. But what I felt emotionally is I completely lost touch with my emotions. I sometimes when you have something happen, you may go numb. Like if you when you lose you said you lost your grandparent,
Yes.
and you're numb. You feel that numbness. This was, you felt nothing. There's not even numbness to feel. It is a whole other nothingness. And so I describe it with it's going into a black hole. And when military people, and especially our Vietnam veterans who are still dealing with the effects of Vietnam, I really feel for them because they can't get out.
Mm-hmm.
You cannot, you're in the hole, it's there, but you can't fight your way out, and then you lose the will to fight. So you just
And I think that's a perfect example too. You said a black hole, because like you just said, you're in there, but you can't see around you. It's pitch black. Like you said, it's a nothingness. And that's a scary, because again, like I said, I've had friends who come back from the military, and you can see it on their face. You know what I mean? Before they go, and you know they're different. Like you described with yourself, when they come back and you talk to them, and they try to have some normalcy, in the conversations. But you could almost see. You ever see a movie? You ever see movies sometimes when, let's say, a scary movie, and somebody's eyes will be almost completely black.
yeah,
That's what it's almost like
yeah,
like
yeah,
you're staring at. You know what I
yeah.
mean? Because they're even when they talk to you, the communication is like,
they're not there. They're
no.
just not there. And I know, and I write in the book, when I came home, I was angry. I was angry. And I'm a happy person. The person you see me right now is, I love who I am now because I have that. I still deal with PTSD. I can still get triggered, but I use that black hole to my advantage. And I'll explain that in a minute. But I kept having the same nightmare over and over, to the point where I did not want to go to sleep. And the nightmare was, I'm in a Chinook helicopter, which it's known for carrying personnel. It's the longer one. And the helicopter crashes. And my friends who I'm in the helicopter with, we get out and we start running in a field, and the insurgents are chasing us, shooting at us. And I can still see the image. I kept having it over, and I couldn't cut it off, Ryan. I couldn't make it stop. So I'm like, well, I don't want to go to sleep, because if I go to sleep, I don't know if I'm going to have it. I may have a night or two when I don't have it. I may go a couple of weeks and not have it. But then all of a sudden the dream, it hits me, and I just didn't want to go to sleep. And I was scared. And again, like I said, I was angry. I was snapping at people. I had no patience. And one particular, I got home on July 2nd of 2004, I think, or 2nd or 3rd. And my favorite holiday is 4th of July. So I decided that I was going to go down to the National Mall and go for a quick run around the mall. And I'm running on the mall, and it's a little cloudy, and I'm like, I'm running, I'm okay. And then I heard this boom, and I immediately freaked out, because I thought somebody had blown themselves up on the National Mall. And I'm like, okay, where are they? Where are they? Where are they? And it was thunder. It was just a clap of thunder. And for a while, if there were thunderstorms, I was completely unhinged, because I thought that people were blowing up stuff. So, and how, and people may ask how I got out of it. It's by the grace of the Lord. When you come back from your deployment, military personnel go through kind of like a post-op meeting. They sit down with a counselor, they sit down with medical professionals, and they ask them questions. Are you okay? Are you, and a lot of these guys just lie, and you can fake it to get through that 5-minute interview. Yeah, I'm fine, I'm good. Look, I'm happy to be home, I'm thrilled, but that darkness is still there. You just fake it so you can get through the interview and go home and get out of there. But now, and I'm not quite sure what the process is now when people come home, but military, medical personnel, and leadership realized that they needed to do more to support soldiers when they came home, to support Marines when they came home. But the thing is, now some of those guys who are coming home, the suicide rate, when I worked at the Department of Veterans Affairs, the suicide rate for veterans or for military personnel, I think, was about 20 persons a month were committing suicide. And it may have been 20 to 22. And I have a very, very dear friend of mine who's a former Marine. And the way that he explained it, he says that it may not be the mental stuff so much, but because these guys are so broken physically, it's the physical pain too. It's they've had been shot. I had one guy I worked with who was shot 6 times, and it's the pain that, of continuing to serve and physically go to war zones. And they break bones, they break backs, they break legs, they break shoulders. That pain stays with you even though the bone is healed. So you're talking people with multiple breaks, and then they're broken here too, and they're broken here too. The pain is what many of these people succumb to more than anything else. It's the daily constant pain, year after year after year, that tears them, that finally breaks them.
And I've always wondered, I feel like this country can do a lot better with this kind of thing. It's almost like I'm going to use you over here, and then when you come back, you on your own.
Yeah.
And then it's almost like, well, we helped you out because we're going to give you a pension
Mm-hmm.
for doing, for doing what we needed you to do. And that trauma, all of that stuff, that's not that's not good. I mean, you have people again. I had a friend of mine who told me his cousin went from in deployment, but when he said he went over there
Mm-hmm.
and they train you to kill,
Mm-hmm.
and you're trained to kill. So every time you're you're trained into a new person. So when it's time to come back from deployment,
Yeah.
he's like, what do I do? Because if somebody makes me mad, I'm still this person who knows who I'm supposed to kill.
Yeah.
But in his mind, he knows that that's not right.
Yeah.
But like you said, he can't. He's in that black hole. He can't change it, and that mental strain, and again, like you said, the physical. That's torture.
Yeah, it is. But there are services and programs, and I would encourage military members, there's a lot out there to help. It's better now than it was when my dad came back from Vietnam. Um, it's better now. They have programs, they have mental health support, they have mental health professionals. Like I said, I worked at the VA, and we traveled around the country, and the VA facilities, they have wonderful medical facilities. When you can get into the system, they have people there to help. But the problem is, some of these people, some military people, and again, not all, some just, they don't want to. They I don't know what the fear is. Some of them just check out. I remember once when I worked for the Secretary of VA, and we took a trip to Alaska. And when we were up there, we met with some veterans who were part of our in the system. And I started talking to this one vet, and again, I've never put on a uniform, but I understand their experience. And so we're standing there talking. The next thing we know, he's bawling, I'm bawling. And we're standing there crying because while he was in Vietnam and I was in Iraq, we know the experience. But then he starts telling me about his brother. His brother, now people, when they go to Alaska, sometimes they're like, look, I want to be where nobody's going to find me. This guy describes the 8-hour trip he has to take to go find his brother just to make sure he's still alive. He's like, first I got to get on a boat, then I got to get on the boat and go here, then I got to ride in the car here, and then I got to trek through the woods up to this point. The guy I think he barely has electricity. He doesn't have a phone. He doesn't have anything that would allow him to have touch with the outside world. This guy, he wants it that way. He came back from Vietnam with some mental conditions and issues, but he just like, he checked out. He checked out from society. And that's the way he wants to be. And you can't force somebody to want to get the help that they need. I know when I came back, they were like, okay, you fine? I'm fine. I'm okay. I'm all right. I knew I wasn't all right. I was jacked up, but I was able to come home, and like I said, I went back for other stuff, but I just feel, I completely, my heart breaks for these men and women who don't have the strength to reach out for help. It's heartbreaking.
So, and this is why I think your book is so necessary, because it gives a avenue, for people when they're reading it to it breaks it down to where they can understand what goes on over there, And also, you know, people who've been through it,
Mhm.
they'll feel like they're not alone. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? Because those are similar stories that they can relate to.
Yeah. Yeah. And like now, when the people that I was in Iraq with, we call ourselves the Iraq Pack, like the Brat Pack from Hollywood. We
Yeah.
call ourselves the Iraq Pack. And when I came back home, I didn't want to be around anybody except somebody who I was in Iraq with. And by the grace of God, we all kind of live in the same general, area in DC and Virginia. So we were kind of near each other.
Hmm.
And so if I was going through something, I would call one of my friends. I was like, Susan, man, I'm having a minute. I need to talk to somebody. She's like, okay, what's going on? I'm like, I just need to talk. She's like, okay, just talk, just talk. And then I was like, okay, I'm good. I, I could not get that from my mom. I could not get that from my pop. I know they love me dearly, but that, I needed that person who understood the experience. And not too long ago, I had a moment. This is maybe a year or so ago. Somebody asked me to, I know my trigger. I can't watch war movies. I just can't. Don't
Hmm.
ask me to watch them. So somebody had asked me to read something about a war movie or coming up, and I read it just because I wanted to honor them. And sure enough, I got triggered.
Hmm.
And I was like, okay, I know what's going on. I called my friend. I called two people that I knew. I said, look, I'm having a moment. I'm just a little upset. And they're like, okay, what's going on? So we talked it out. And then I felt exhausted emotionally. So I went and I laid down for like 4 or 5 hours. And they said, that's good. That's good. You rested, you got through, you talked it out, you were able to express your feelings, you still have feelings, and then you laid down and you got some rest. And then I got up the next day and I was fine. So, and I just want to share, I said a moment ago that I kind of use my experience to my benefit.
Hmm.
So what's not in the book is after I left Iraq, I went in another job, went to the Pentagon for a while, and then I moved to Kansas. And I lived in Kansas at Fort Riley, right outside Junction City. And my job was to support the Army commanding general for the 1st Infantry Division. So my job was kind of like a political advisor to the Army general. And so since I just was still fresh from Iraq and Afghanistan, because I started going to Afghanistan too. And when my job, the first general I worked for, he was a great guy, General Brooks. He actually wrote the blurb for the book. He's an outstanding military leader. He's retired now. So I started off with General Brooks. Ryan, in 8.5, 9 years, I worked for 16 different Army generals. 16. So it was like getting a new boss every 10 months. 16 over that period, because there was a high deployment rate at the first ID. And I'll say this will be my last story. So when I went out there to work for these Army generals, they didn't know what to do with me. It was like I showed up in Baghdad with hoop earrings all over again. I wasn't in uniform. I didn't have a rank, so they didn't know, what rank are you? And I'm like, look, sir, I'm here to help keep you out of trouble. I deal with the community, I deal with members of Congress. It is my job to advise you. You can take my advice or not.
Hmm.
So by the time I got to general number 7, 8, or 9, I can't remember. Now, generals do have tempers occasionally. And there were times when a couple of them got lit me up on fire. But I would go into what I called Baghdad mode. And I literally, on 2 occasions, had generals who were yelling at me. And one guy was yelling at me, and I was like, okay, dude, I know you're yelling at me, but there are other people that are watching you yell at me. So I'm not worried about it, but you're making yourself look bad as you're yelling at me.
Yeah.
But and then one guy, he was just, oh, he lit me up. And I was standing there and I was like, yes, sir, I don't know what I'm talking about. Yes, sir, you're correct. I did that wrong. Yes, sir, absolutely. And I said, sir, do you want me to leave now or do you want me to stay? And I was so zen. And I think it scared him, because I think he was like, are you trying to see me cry? Is that what you're trying? You're trying to get me to cry. Bro, it ain't happening.
But you
I ain't
know,
got nothing. You ain't got nothing.
But that's interesting though, because the general is in such a mode all the time that he feels like I can get you this way by hollering.
Yeah.
And you brought some type of normalcy that he probably wasn't used to, or he might have seen in that moment, he might have seen his wife, he might have seen his mom or somebody. And yeah, you broke him down. Yeah.
And that's exactly it, because the one guy that was yelling at me, he called me back into his office to see what my emotional state was. And I was like, yes, sir. I mean, it was nothing. And I think it's kind of scared him. He's like,
Yeah.
okay, she's not even reacting. This, I think that was worse than I
Yeah.
was reacting. But I'll tell you, almost all 16 of those Army generals, I still keep in touch with most of them.
Yes.
I love them. And I would, if they asked me to go to battle for them, sir, what time do you want me there?
Mhm.
Because what they eventually did when they learned that I was a trusted advisor, they started to let their walls down. They let their walls down. They let their walls down. And they let me in to a certain extent. And I had such a good reputation amongst not only the generals and the spouses that one day a spouse came to me and she said, Traci, you have a really good reputation amongst us spouses. That was the best compliment anybody could ever give, because I'm trying to tell their husbands, look, sir, you just jacked this up. And if you don't fix it, you're really going to be in trouble.
Mhm.
And I had to have straight talk with them. And I was like, I wouldn't back down. And that's when they learn, okay, I can trust her.
Yeah.
So anyway, but
So
that's
what? I got an interesting question for you. It just popped in my head.
okay.
What Traci right now? What would you tell young Traci?
Mm, mm. Don't give up.
Mm,
Don't give up, sweetheart. Don't give up. Because there are so many people that along my career path have tried to stop me, block me, um, tear me down. And I just would get back up. I would just get back up. I had people who tried to block me from getting jobs and, talk badly about me, and just, they tried to just block my career path, and I would just get back up. And so I would tell that younger Traci, sweetheart, don't give up. And that's the same thing I would tell a soldier. I
mm.
would tell anybody who's in their war zone right now, sweetheart, don't give up. Don't give up.
So that was really good. When you when you're in your book, when you're talking about, war zones, war zones are, everything that people go through in life that may be tough for them. You know, what what is some good advice that you could give people who may be, you know, who may be watching this, or somebody who doesn't feel like they can go to anybody? What's some good advice that you could lend those
Oh, Lord.
people?
Well, and there are different life lessons, like I said, here in this book.
Mhm.
And one chapter is about BBFs, bunker buddies forever, friends. If you're in a war zone, you need a good friend. And that's why people who come back with military units, they want to stick with that unit. They want to stick with that friend,
Mhm.
because I can't describe, Ryan, when bullets and mortars and rockets start coming in, you don't know where they're going to land. And we would always, the bunkers are with, when we were in Iraq, there were these concrete, like U-shaped structures, so that if the rockets and mortars started coming in, you could duck into a bunker and it would protect you. And so you're in the bunker, and because the bunker's open so that you can get in there, other people would gather into the bunker. So you're all hunkered down in the
Mhm.
bunker, or the bunker was in the basement of Saddam's palace. So you guys literally run to the basement and you're there until the rocket fire stops. And when you're in the bunker, you just, you start talking with people, you don't know how long you're going to be there. When you have these super intense moments, the walls come down because you don't know if you're going to make it into the next minute. So, I would say to people, you need a friend. You need somebody that you can kind of hold hands with as you're going through the tough parts. I think it says in the Bible or somewhere along the way that one or two gathered together is okay, but a cord of three is really strong. And so if you have that person and they're kind of holding your hand, it helps in those tough times. Nobody wants to, if you're going through a war zone alone, you're going to be so worse off. So I would say if you have a good girlfriend or a guy friend that you can have to go through a war zone with, it really, really helps a lot. And also, and one thing, and I'm going to go out on this too, I have faith. Oh my God, we were joking a minute ago. I think my next book is God Watches Out for Fools, Children, and Traci Scott. Because, I used to get into some dumb stuff. I did dumb stuff in Iraq. Do you hear me? It was a war zone and I really did stupid stuff. And it was like, okay, Jesus, I think you pulled me out of that one. But it's faith. If you don't have something higher to believe in, all bets are off. Forget it. You're not gonna do good.
And that leads me. I've had so much fun with you. I want to talk to you off camera when we're done for a little bit, because I want to talk to you about something. But that just leads me to my last question though. When you was talking about faith, through everything that you have been through in your entire life, what has life taught you about yourself mentally and spiritually?
Oh Lord. It's just brought me closer to the Lord. It really has. I remember one time I was walking into the palace one morning, and I was walking in and a chunk of the palace literally blew up in front of me. I mean, and you don't get a warning. There's no warning. All of a sudden, bright orange ball of fire and bang. Had I walked in there a 1 minute earlier, I would have been in that. And I just, my faith just got so much stronger. And when I realized, once we were flying in a helicopter, I was going with Ambassador Bremer down to Fallujah, and the pilot literally, something happened and he almost hit a power line, and the whole helicopter banked completely on the right side. The windows were open. Had we not been strapped in, we would have fallen out of the Black Hawk helicopter.
Oh, goodness.
And I mean, like moments like that, it's like, how can you not believe in Jesus? Because he kept me in that plane.
Yeah.
He kept me in that helicopter. So when when you're, and the one of the biggest stories in here, I'm not going to tell it because I want you to read it, was a moment when I was like, how many times have I avoided death in this war zone? Again, you're talking to somebody, 3 hours later, that person who is standing next to you is dead. And how are you not dead? It's that whole survivor's guilt. So I'm like, thank you, Lord. I cannot thank you enough for bringing me to this point. But the last little story about this book, shows you how God is. Ryan, I wrote this book 15 years ago.
Wow.
15 years ago. And I went to New York to pitch it to publishers. And they're like, well, we don't know where to put it in the bookshelf. And I don't know, we're not sure. So I got rejected by like 5 or 6 publishers, but I still believed in it. Now, today, 15 years later, it's just as relevant as it was 15 years ago. And I'm sitting here talking to you about this book.
Yep.
Look what God can do.
Yeah, it's his. When you follow his plan, it's never going to be it's never going to be when we expect it to be. But he sees the bigger picture of things, and you going through all of that, and you having your father and your grandfather and all of them who went through all of those things. It's when you sit back and look at it, it's you understand the purpose of what life was about, what they were here for, what they were here to teach you, and then what you're here to teach others. And it's just it's also purposeful. And I was when I was reading your again, I was reading your bio. I was telling you earlier that I thought it was dope. You know what I mean? I thought it was so cool reading it because it was like, it's we all come from, different backgrounds, and we all have different cultures. Our culture is the same, but we all have similarities of things that we go through. It may be something a little different, but sometimes those emotions are the same. Those thought processes are the same. And talking with you, it's like I feel like I've known you forever. You know what I mean? It's not weird.
No,
It's
it's
like,
just like, yes, it's like a vibe. And just tell your wife, if I call you one afternoon, just say, oh, that's just Traci. She's just
yeah,
running something past me. Just tell your wife,
yeah,
it's just Traci. She's calling again. She wants to talk to you next,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
But you know what? I think, Ryan, also too, is that in a war zone, you really learn that life is short.
Mm,
It's short. And you live it with intensity. Okay, one of us could be gone this afternoon as soon as we hang up from the Zoom call.
mhm,
So you learn to appreciate the moment as much as you can in that moment. That's one thing one big lesson I learned, that, and I think I did write about it in here. You learn to appreciate the moment right away. And people who have not experienced their war zone don't understand that concept yet.
mm.
But you will. When you get into your war zone, you're like, oh, I could be gone, or my spouse could be gone, my child could be gone. Okay, in order to make sure, I'm just going to live life to the fullest and embrace it. And like my girlfriends that I was over in Iraq with, and even some of my sorority sisters, when we get off the phone, it's like we always say I love you, because we don't know. We don't know. And the people that I was in Iraq with, we freely say I love you because we know what we've been through. We made it out, but we don't know when that next call is going to come that somebody's gone.
Oh,
So you learn to say, enjoy your relationships, just pull everything out of them, enjoy everything that you can in them, because, hey.
Miss Traci Scott, I can't tell you how much this conversation has helped me. You know what I mean? Just hearing your story and hearing all the things that you've been through, and then when I'm going to put the title of the book. I'm going to put everything in the description of my YouTube of the YouTube episode when I do edit it. And I hope that me and you can continue to stay in touch and one day network together, because I think you're a dope person. I think I think you can help a whole bunch of people, and I want you to continue to live in your purpose and do the things that God has you to do, because I mean you've been doing it, and He's got so much for you going forward. So, Miss Traci Scott, I appreciate you again for jumping on my Deep Conversations podcast.
I'm Aunt Ryan. I felt like I made a new friend.
Absolutely.
And thank you for the honor, and thank you for what you're doing, because you're walking in your purpose just as much as I am. So continue to get people out there, get their voices out there, let their voices be heard. That is the most important thing, because right now in some areas our voices are being stifled. So make sure that you allow people continue this platform so that we can have our voices heard and we can help one another. So I hope that this book brings people together, and I thank you for the opportunity. I'm so honored to meet you, Ryan.
You're on YouTube, baby.